Keith Whan, the Liberal member for Menzies. Good afternoon, Keith.
Good afternoon, Charlie, and to your listeners as well.
So what don't you like about this policy? I mean, there are a lot of people that say whatever you can do to make me pay less at the checkout sounds like a good idea.
I'm going to disappoint you after that introduction. I'm not coming on here to say I don't like this policy. What I will say is that we had a really vigorous discussion in the party room yesterday. Both major parties don't disclose what happens in the party room, but I'm not going to deny that concerns were raised by people, but we arrived at a position that I think is in the national interest, is consistent with our values, and I think is what people really need right now, particularly with soaring food prices.
Now, you say that it's consistent with your values. I had a chat to Jeff Kennet earlier in the program and asked him about the policy, and this is what he had to say about it.
It's an unenforceable policy. It means nothing, and it is part of the green agenda. This is the most extreme policy, and a policy that to me is totally foreign to those on my side of politics.
Now, as the member for Menzies, would Menzies be rolling in his grave if he heard a policy like this?
Well, this I like and respect Jeff Kennet, but Jeff
That's
Kennet
a safe policy too.
That's all right. He hasn't seen the detail that I have seen. He hasn't had the questions and concerns that many of us raised answered. And this has arrived at a place that isn't, I know the headline is divestiture, but there's a lot more to this. This is about strengthening the food and grocery code, which already exists, by making it mandatory for supermarkets of a certain size. It increases penalties. It introduces a commissioner who will hear and confidential complaints from farmers and suppliers at the moment they feel intimidated. And then at a very last resort, there will be beefed up powers in Section 46. And there's also other safeguards within that. For instance, the courts will have a public interest test that they will overlay on that will include things like how this will impact on unemployment or whether there is an actual sufficient buyer to take an asset. But that's the last resort. It's just giving a little bit more power to the umpire, that is the ACCC, to act in consumers' interests.
I'm speaking with Keith Whan, the Liberal member for Menzies. I mean, what you've described there in the detail of the policy sounds like regulation upon regulation upon regulation, and then empowering the regulator a little bit more. That doesn't seem like what the Liberal Party normally talk about. Normally it's free market, let business do their job, let them make the decisions of how to do it. Is that part of the reason why there was, to use your words, a vigorous debate for over an hour?
There was a vigorous debate over an hour because this is a complex problem that has competing values and interests. But let's go back to the fundamental definition of a market. Free markets are not anarchy. They have rules, they have umpires, they don't work without the courts lying behind all of that. So we have to recognise that there are rules and umpires. And so when the umpire, the ACCC, tells us that they need this power in their toolkit in order to reduce market power, which will see reduced prices, we should listen. And let's not forget that Australia is unique in the world for the concentration of market power in certain sectors. Coles and Woolworths have almost 65% of the grocery market. So for every $6.50 out of 10 people spend, it goes to those two. Aldi is at 10. And we know in basic economic theory that concentration of power leads to higher prices. So that's what we're trying to address here.
Now, you said that parties don't report or speak about what occurs inside the party room, but it has been reported in a number of publications that you at least raised concerns about the policy. Now, without saying what anyone else said in the room, what were your concerns?
Well, let me speak in generalities because it is important that members and senators can speak freely in party room. That's why we have those rules. Both parties do. But can I say this? When we are talking about higher prices for consumers, we can all agree that the Australian economy does lend itself to oligopolies, not just in supermarkets, also in energy, in telecommunications and many other areas. And one of the reasons that has been put for that is our geography. We are a very big country with huge distances between our major capital cities and regional towns. And so you need a huge infrastructure spend in order to have the supply chains that will put a Coles or a Woolworths in a regional town. And that is one of the reasons given for concentration of market power in Australia. But when we can all agree that there's a problem we have to solve, one of the questions we will raise is, are there unintended consequences for what we are proposing? And I'm not paid just to turn up and tick off on a policy. The people of Menzies have sent me there to interrogate policies and propose policies to make sure they're in the national interest and that they're in their interests. And so that's why I will never show up and just say, oh, good to go. I will always say, is this right? Are there unintended consequences and can we do better?
So what are some of the unintended consequences that there could be that possibly were discussed vigorously, I hear, in the party room?
Again, speaking in generalities, some of the unintended consequences, whenever you beef up a section of an act, will there be unnecessary litigation and expensive litigation? And before this job, I was a commercial barrister for 12 years, and in fact, it was in many of the trials that litigated these sections. Going to court is very expensive, it's time consuming. And so what I wanted to know is that are we creating a system that will lead to other litigation costs that will be passed on? But I was satisfied with the way the particular test is drafted and how it will put the consumer's interests first. And it is a test of last resort. So I think having this there will force the supermarkets to act in consumer interests and reduce the sort of bullying tactics that we've seen on suppliers and smaller operators.
As a commercial barrister, you're obviously mindful of potential legal pitfalls, but I'll ask you as a politician. We remember when the Labor Party tried to introduce a mining super tax and the enormous media campaign that was waged against them by the very, very deep pockets of the miners. Are you at least a little bit concerned as someone who at some point has to run for an election when companies and everyone can buy ads on TV, that you might be facing an avalanche of advertising against you from these enormous commercial operators?
Charlie, we are sent here to act in the national interest and in a way that is consistent with our values. If I ever change my position on those because of the potential threat of a big corporation running a campaign against me, I will resign. That's not what should motivate us. It doesn't motivate me. And if the big supermarkets want to run a campaign against the coalition, they're free to do that, and that's their prerogative. But it won't intimidate me, and it won't change my mind.
Well, in a day of spin and practicality, some high principles there. Keith Whan, the Liberal member for Menzies, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Charlie.